What if intuition is not a mysterious feeling, but a form of perception operating at a higher informational resolution than our normal senses? What if what we call extrasensory perception is simply the mind detecting patterns and signals outside the standard perceptual bandwidth of human cognition? And what if the experiences we label as psychic, clairvoyant, premonitions, or gut feelings are not anomalies, but information arriving from dimensions or layers of reality that our culture, science, and language have yet to map? In this video, we set aside the discussion of instinct for later and turn instead to a framework that reimagines intuition and extrasensory perception not as mystical or supernatural anomalies, but as natural extensions of perception operating within a multi-dimensional informational universe. In this episode, we explore a more precise, elegant, and accurate way of understanding intuition and extrasensory perception. Rather than relying on their usual framing, I'll expand them in a way that stays grounded, clean, and uncompromised, without mystifying or diluting them. In this video, we will explore rethinking intuition and extrasensory perception. What happens when we combine extrasensory perception, ESP, and intuition? What is extrasensory intuition? The mechanics of extrasensory intuition. How the Flatland analogy helps explain higher dimensional perception. Reality, dimensions, and perception. Why intuition often activates during moments of instability and transition. By the end of this discussion, you may see intuition not as something mystical, but as a form of non-linear intelligence interacting with the deeper informational structure of reality. To understand what extrasensory intuition might be, we need to separate three things that are often blended together in popular discussions. Instinct, biological survival intelligence. Extrasensory perception, ESP, expanded sensory detection. Intuition, integrative pattern recognition. Most conversations about intuition mix all three together, which makes the concept vague. By separating them, we can see how they interact as parts of a larger perceptual system. As explained in the previous video, intuition is coherence recognition. It is the mind's ability to recognize coherence across many layers of information at once. Intuition leads. It determines which signals are meaningful and which are noise because it comes from an integrative system. It also integrates instinct and extrasensory perception outputs. Extrasensory perception expands the sensory bandwidth, but intuition interprets this expanded informational space. So, when we combine the two concepts, meaning if someone had both intuition and psychic perception working together, we would call it psychic or extrasensory intuition. I'm going to call it extrasensory intuition in this video. This allows us to describe extrasensory intuition not as something mystical, but as a higher order integrative process that organizes information coming from multiple perceptual layers. Extrasensory intuition is the perception of informational layers that exist beyond the dominant sensory cognitive bandwidth of a given dimensional context. Extrasensory intuition is perception of an extra layer of dimension not normally perceived and/or understood by the current average level of consciousness of the beings inhabiting a certain dimension. It is extrasensory only in relation to the current average perceptual calibration of the beings occupying that dimension. Every dimension, physical or otherwise, operates with a bandwidth of available information. Most beings perceive only the layers required for survival and social functioning within that bandwidth. Extrasensory intuition emerges when a consciousness becomes sensitive to additional strata of information that is present but not culturally, neurologically, or scientifically mapped by that civilization. Reality is not only what we can see. Reality is what exists and influences us. We know, for example, that most of the universe is invisible. Particles behave differently depending on how they are observed. Information exists prior to form. What we perceive depends on the resolution of the measuring device. Human perception is just another measuring device. In physics and engineering, bandwidth means the range of information a system can detect and process. A radio tuned to FM cannot receive Wi-Fi, not because Wi-Fi doesn't exist, but because the receiver is not calibrated for that frequency range. Human consciousness works the same way. Our senses and cognition are tuned for survival, object recognition, social navigation, cause and effect at human scale. This is our default perceptual bandwidth. Extrasensory intuition is not supernatural. It is a higher resolution perception. Extrasensory intuition is only extrasensory relative to the average calibration. If everyone were born with infrared vision, we wouldn't call it extrasensory. It would just be vision. So extrasensory intuition sits outside the dominant cognitive language, not outside reality. As you probably already know or have heard of, if you're watching this video, the universe is a holographic fractal light matrix. And what does this mean? Well, one of the implications is that each dimension is the shadow of the one above it, in quotes. The universe does not behave like a stack of separate floors, though. It behaves like a projection system. Modern physics already tells us this in quite ways. The holographic principle suggests that higher dimensional information is encoded on lower dimensional surfaces. Quantum fields exist before particles appear. Form follows information/function, not the other way around. In simple terms, what we experience as reality is a projection of deeper informational layers. A shadow is not a mistake. A shadow is what remains when higher order information is reduced into fewer degrees of freedom. In plain language, the core idea is this. Each lower, in quotes, dimension is not a separate world. Each dimension is a lower resolution rendering of a more complex reality. Just like a 3D object casts a 2D shadow, a 2D image compresses a 3D scene. A photograph collapses depth, texture, and movement into a flat surface. Consciousness works the same way. every lower dimension, in quotes, is the visible silhouette of a richer, more coherent layer right above it, in quotes. In order for you to understand this, let's dive into a brilliant and yet very simple analogy described in one of my favorite books, The Ascension Papers. One of the most powerful conceptual tools ever created for explaining higher dimensional perception, the Flatland analogy. This thought experiment allows us to explore how beings confined to a lower dimensional reality might interpret events caused by higher dimensional structures they cannot directly perceive. The analogy is extremely useful because it shows how seemingly supernatural events can arise naturally from dimensional limitations of perception. If you're already familiar with this concept, feel free to move ahead. Even so, I encourage you to watch the next section in full, as it will provide important context and deepen your understanding of what follows. The Ascension Papers, Book 2 by Zingdad, Chapter 1.1, Dimensions. The Flatland World Concept. If you stand between a bright light source and a screen, then you will cast a shadow on the screen. What you, perhaps, haven't considered before now is that your shadow is your body in two dimensions. It has height and width, but it has no depth. No matter how closely you look, you will never be able to measure a shadow's thickness. It has none, as it is not really a thing in the normal sense of the word. It is merely an absence of light. So, it has only two dimensions, the dimension of height and the dimension of width. Your shadow is a 2D object. Now, I'd like you to please imagine a 2D being, someone very like your shadow, but a being of independent consciousness. He is going to help us understand dimensions. Let's give him a name. Let's call him Shadow Man. Let's imagine you could have a conversation with him. Remember, his world isn't actually simply flat. It is much worse than that. The conception of depth does not simply exist for him. So, not only can Shadow Man not see over even the smallest obstacle, he can't even begin to imagine the concept of over. He can't even think in terms of there being an above or a below. If Shadow Man and a number of his friends stood next to each other, he would not be able to see beyond the friend on either side of him, and he would also not be able to conceptualize what it might be like to see past someone. So, if you asked him how many friends had gathered and he only had one friend on either side of him in his direct line of sight, then his best answer would have to be 2. Other friends that were beyond his line of sight would not be in his presence and who could not know that they were there. You, on the other hand, could see everyone in the gathering like so many shadows on the wall, and you would immediately know how many there were by simply counting them. You could tell Shadow Man which friends he was going to see at this party, and he would be astounded at your prescience. Not only this, but you would be able to see, to all intents and purposes, inside Shadow Man. You would be able to see any internal organs and structures his body might have, and even what he ate for lunch. You would also be able to see inside closed boxes and through walls and barriers. Your ability to see and know things like this would astound Shadow Man. He would think you are godlike in your comprehension of his world. You would, to his mind, have an impossible ability to see what lay ahead of him long before he could discover this for himself. And if you tried to explain to him that you didn't really have supernatural powers, but could merely perceive the extra dimension of depth, then you would find that he would simply not understand what you are talking about. You could possibly use analogies to give him some idea as to what depth is like, but sadly, he will never really know what it would be like to live in a world with this third dimension, depth. To a flatlander, higher dimensional perception would appear miraculous. But from a higher dimensional perspective, it would simply be normal perception operating with an additional degree of freedom. This is the conceptual bridge that helps us understand how extrasensory intuition might operate. Next, I will show a video excerpt from the YouTube channel called The Lazy Engineer, entitled A Journey into the Fourth Dimension, Perspective, Part 1, for you to understand how we would perceive higher dimensions interacting with our own with the help of powerful visual aids.
And now imagine if our Flatlander friends were looking at the circle and saw this. To the Flatlanders, it looks as if the circle has shrunk down to a tiny point before disappearing completely, then magically reappearing only to grow back to its original size. This would be like seeing a human vanish before our eyes, then rematerialize moments later. There would be no explanation for how this could happen. Or could there? What if we told these Flatlanders that this was not a circle, but something called a sphere? Something that is not circular, but round. Something that extends into a direction that doesn't even exist in their reality. Besides calling you a liar and denouncing our circle over here as a witch, the Flatlanders still wouldn't understand what you mean. Instead, we can show them projections of our sphere onto Flatland, and associate the directions of up and down to the way the projections change. When objects from our 3D world intersect Flatland, the Flatlanders see a projection, a cross-section of our object. It can move left, right, and forward and backwards, just like the two-dimensional shapes in Flatland, but it can also move up and down, perpendicular to the Flatland plane. It's obvious to us how the projections form a sphere, but it's not necessarily obvious to the Flatlanders. Now, I want you to pretend that you are a Flatlander, and I am going to show you the projections of some unknown objects, and your job is to figure out what the object actually is. If you can do it, then perhaps our friends in Flatland may be able to as well. It's interesting how we can picture higher dimensional geometries with so little information. In those examples, all we considered were the lower dimensional projections of the 3D objects. The only additional information that I gave you was the direction that the object was moving. And with that, we were able to build a mental image of the actual object through a compilation of the slices that we saw. So Flatlanders should be able to do the same thing. They can form their own mental compositions of the projections that they see, and by doing so, they too can understand what a three-dimensional object is.
This video explains, in clear visual and conceptual terms, what the fourth spatial dimension means and how we can think about it from our three-dimensional perspective. It uses geometric reasoning and intuitive visuals to show how a 4D object would relate to 3D space, how lower dimensional beings perceive higher dimensions, and how higher dimensions can be projected into lower ones for us to visualize. And it also helps us visualize what shadow men, or what the video calls Flatlanders, would see when a 3D object interacts with their 2D world. One might then imagine how a consciousness operating from higher dimensions, even across far more distant layers of existence, might attempt to communicate with human beings within the constraints of three-dimensional perception on Earth. They must first find a way to capture your attention, and for that to occur, there must be something within your field of perception capable of being noticed. So, in conclusion, this video from the Lazy Engineer YouTube channel, even if it does not precisely convey the intended meaning, presents a conceptual model for thinking about intuition and extrasensory perception in a more structured way. Instead of framing them as mystical or supernatural phenomena, my intention here is to trace a possible underlying coherent pattern and consider them as natural extensions of perception and cognition unfolding across layers of information that lie beyond the threshold of ordinary human perception. Another way to think about this is that perception is resolution dependent. Just as microscopes reveal structures invisible to the naked eye, and radio telescopes detect signals beyond optical wavelengths, consciousness may also have different possible resolutions of perception. What you're able to perceive depends on the resolution of your sensing system, just like with physical instruments. In simple terms, your naked eye have limited resolution. You can't see bacteria. A microscope increases resolution. Suddenly, bacteria becomes visible to you. A radio telescope detects wavelengths your eyes can't, revealing an entirely different layer of reality. So, perception isn't fixed and it has limits. The limit is based on your current level of consciousness and awareness. If consciousness has something like adjustable resolution, then intuition or unusual insights might come from accessing patterns or signals that are normally below or above or in any direction outside our normal threshold of awareness. If the perception of beings living inside a certain dimension is dimension-bound, then information can only arrive through the channels that dimension allows. When I say dimension, think of it like this. A dimension is not necessarily another place. It is another degree of freedom. In physics, a 2D being cannot perceive depth. It doesn't mean depth doesn't exist. It just means that a 2D being cannot perceive it. Sense the difference. A 3D being can see what the 2D being cannot even imagine. The 2D being might experience shadows, distortions, unexplained appearances, but not depth itself. Extrasensory intuition is like perceiving depth in a world trained to see flat surfaces. For shadow men, there is no above, no depth, no anticipation beyond line of sight. Yet, imagine this. If shadow man sometimes feels something before it appears in his line, he wouldn't call it depth. He would call it a hunch. Not knowledge, not vision, a disturbance. That's our starting point. Extrasensory perception and intuition as information without geometry. The rational mind needs sequence, causality, symbols, time. Extrasensory intuition arrives as already formed sense, non-linear, wordless, simultaneous. That's exactly what information looks like when the geometry that generated it is unavailable to you. You perceive the projection, not the structure. Just as a 3D object casts a 2D shadow, the shadow is real, but incomplete, and cannot explain itself. So intuition feels vague, certain without reason, correct without explanation. Not because it's magical, but because the reasoning didn't occur in your dimensional frame. Why intuition is often strongest during certain times. Intuition is often strongest in transitions, unstable systems, emotionally charged dynamics, because those systems have strong curvature. Curvature, a deviation from linearity. In any system, linear equals predictable, proportional, steady. Curved equals changing rate, bending trajectory, non-uniform behavior. In mathematics and physics, curvature appears when straight lines stop being reliable, cause and effect is no longer proportional, small inputs create large shifts, and trajectories bend instead of extend. So, when I say a system has strong curvature in quotes, I mean the future cannot be extrapolated from the past using straight lines. Why extrasensory intuition activates in curved systems. Analytical reasoning works best when rules are stable, variables are known, behavior is linear, time unfolds smoothly. Extrasensory intuition activates when rules are in flux, variables are hidden, outcomes depend on relationships, not steps. The system is about to change state. That about to change moment is curvature. Imagine you are driving on a straight highway. In this situation, you can relax, right? Now, imagine you are driving on a sharp mountain curve. Then your attention will spike, right? Why? Because curvature increases risk, information density, and consequence. Intuition is your cornering sense. It evolved to handle bends, edges, thresholds, cliffs, not straight roads. Conclusion: curvature is where the future stops being a straight extension of the past. Intuition is the cognitive mode that operates where straight lines break. So, intuition isn't mystical perception. It's non-linear intelligence optimized for transitions, instability, emotional charged fields, threshold moments, system-level shifts. Intuition develops when consciousness is no longer consumed by survival. And this is what we are going to explore in the next video. Intuition does not violate physics. It anticipates where physics hasn't fully mapped yet. And historically, that's exactly how every major expansion of understanding has begun. Throughout history, many discoveries have started as intuitive insights before becoming formal scientific models. Scientists, engineers, and mathematicians often report that the solution appears first as an intuition and the formal reasoning comes later. In that sense, intuition may function as a pre-analytical detection system for emerging patterns. Only afterward does rational analysis translate those patterns into language, mathematics, or theory. Whether one interprets extrasensory intuition as a cognitive phenomenon, a perceptual extension, or a dimensional interface, the key idea remains the same. Human perception does not define the boundaries of reality. It is only our perception that is limited by how we are configured to perceive. But perception is not fixed. It is shaped by how our minds are conditioned, trained, and configured to interpret the world. And that configuration is not immutable. It can be refined and consciously reoriented. This is where genuine awakening begins, not as a mystical event, but as a gradual process of reclaiming sovereignty over one's own perception. But here is the challenge. It requires a very strong willingness to question inherited assumptions, to recognize the filters through which reality has been presented to us, and to deliberately cultivate a clearer, less conditioned by others' way of seeing. In other words, awakening is not about escaping reality. It is about learning to perceive it with greater independence, clarity, and depth, rather than passively adopting the interpretations imposed by cultural conditioning, institutional narratives, collective habit, or even spiritual communities, which often transmit assumptions without fully recognizing their origins. And that is where freedom begins. Expand your perception, and the universe you once believed was all there was will quietly unfold, revealing itself to have always been a far greater, infinitely more powerful existence.